No, I'm a fan of Tua, the quarterback from Alabama. If he didn't have an injury, he would be the best player in the draft and the most influential. I think he's Drew Brees, left-handed, but the injury stuff, like Drew Brees had an injury early in his career, and the Miami Dolphins would not take a chance on Drew Brees. The New Orleans Saints did, and the Saints now are a top 5-6 organization in the NFL because they took a chance on Drew Brees, and the Miami Dolphins have been swimming in mediocrity and trying to find a quarterback because they would not roll the dice on Drew Brees. I've said Patrick Mahomes had a lot of injuries in college. The Chiefs now are the best team in the NFL. They rolled the dice. Jimmy Garoppolo had some injuries in New England and San Francisco. They're all in. They got to the Super Bowl. The reality is teams that have rolled the dice on quarterbacks with a few injuries, Carson Wentz, Philadelphia, are doing very well. You can't be scared off. But here's another thing why I like Tua. In my opinion, and any reasonable person's opinion, the SEC is not only the best conference in college football, the top 6 or 7 of the SEC is a mile better than anybody else. The Big Ten is second, and I'm not sure much past Ohio State it's that close. What does that mean? It means Tua is easier to evaluate than Big Ten players, than especially Pac-12 players and ACC players and Big 12 players. And I'll give you an example. And the reason being is because Florida, Georgia, LSU, Auburn, Alabama, now Texas A&M, the Mississippi schools, they've got NFL guys everywhere. So when I watch Tua, I'm watching it against an NFL pass rush and NFL corners and NFL linebackers. And I'll give you an example. This is when I really thought about it this weekend. So you know I'm a USC homer, right? You all think I'm a USC homer. Well, the last time the West Coast had a dynasty was Pete Carroll and USC. And first year, they were 6-6 and trying to find their way. The next year, they got pretty good, and they had Carson Palmer and stuff, and they were pretty good, and they beat Oklahoma badly in a bowl game. And after that, they had about 4 years they were just money. 2003, 4, 2005, 2006, they played in 3 national championship games. They won 2. If you look at the drafts, once they got the ball rolling, because anybody out west will tell you the Pac-12 was crap during those years. Washington was awful. UCLA was awful. The Arizona schools couldn't get their act together. Chip Kelly wasn't at Oregon yet. Stanford didn't have Jim Harbaugh yet. The conference has never been weaker, but USC was great, and they were owning the West Coast. That was at a time that SEC schools didn't recruit the West Coast. So USC was literally getting 15 of the top 18 players in the West Coast. The conference was completely lopsided. So Pete dominates it, Pete Carroll. Jeff Tedford at Cal was about the only pushback at all, and Pete was trying to get him out of the conference for years and eventually did. But go look at the drafts from 2004, 2005, 2006. 20 USC players were drafted in that time. 19 of them were overdrafted. Only Sean Cody is a guy, he was a second-round pick, and he was worth a second-round pick. I'm not even going to name names because I know half the guys. Everybody was overdrafted. Why? You couldn't tell how good USC players were. They were dominating non-NFL bodies. 19 of the 20 players, 2004 draft, 2005 draft, 2006, right in the heart of Pete Carroll owning all the West Coast talent. And he would cherry pick 2 or 3 players out of Florida a year, maybe one out of, the Northeast, New Jersey. I mean, they were rolling. But it was harder to evaluate. Now let's go to Oklahoma. Oklahoma, last 4 years, has dominated a weaker conference. Texas can't get their act together with Tom Herman yet. I think they will eventually, but they can't. And the rest of the conference is, it's mostly a mess. Nebraska left the conference. Texas A&M was there, left the conference. It's mostly really Oklahoma and everybody else. They've dominated it. And they also, like Pete Carroll, have great coaching. Bob Stoops is a great coach, Lincoln Riley. So if you look at the last 4 years and then look at the players drafted from Oklahoma to the NFL. Now, unlike USC, they don't have nearly as many first-round picks. A lot of the Oklahoma guys getting drafted are second, third, fourth, fifth-round picks. But of the 20 Oklahoma players drafted, 1 is better than his draft pick, Mark Andrews, the tight end, 3rd round of Baltimore. He's over-delivered. He's clearly good enough to be a second-round pick. Kyler Murray, promising. We don't know yet. Joe Mixon, good. Second-rounder, he's been solid. But if you look at Oklahoma, I can argue about 15 of the 20 guys overdrafted. My point, it is incredibly difficult when you have a dominant, well-coached program, Oklahoma now, in a weaker conference. USC, Pete Carroll then in a weaker conference because those schools have nothing but NFL bodies and they're facing XFL level players. It is harder to evaluate. I'll give you an example. Last year's NFL draft. Think about this. My staff did a good job to point this out to me this morning. So last year, and again, it's early to discover make or break guys 1 year out. But at last year's NFL draft, there were 7 receivers taken in the second round. 4 of them are better than all the first round receivers taken. All 4 went to SEC schools. 4 for 4. 4 second-round SEC receivers are better than all the first-round wide receivers. You think it's a coincidence? So when I look at Tua and even Joe Burrow, I'm like, well, I know they're good because they beat great players and they beat NFL players. Now, I do think Joe Burrow had the greatest offensive line maybe since the 72 USC Trojans or the 95 Nebraska Cornhuskers. It may have been the deepest wide receiving crew I've ever seen in my life, and Joe Burrow had a lot going for him. But I know when Joe Burrow faced Alabama, he faced NFL players. And when Tua faced LSU, he faced NFL players. I think it's easier to look at Tua's tape, that championship game against Georgia. Again, that Georgia defense has 25 guys who will eventually play in the NFL. First and 2 deep. And then you look at the next 2 years, and I'm like, well, he's doing it on one leg half the time against NFL players. I think you go look at Pete Carroll, you look at Oklahoma, well-coached dynasties or really great programs in weaker conferences. How good is a running back that makes a corner miss when the corner's not a draftable player? I know when I watch Jerry Jeudy at Alabama, the wide receiver, who I think is the best wide receiver by a mile in this draft. I know when I watch him, and he turns on the accelerators, and he flies past a Georgia or Florida guy. I can look at the comp and go, he's flying past an NFL corner. I can't say that in the Big 12. I can't say that in the ACC outside of Clemson. When you watch Clemson players, again, they beat an NC State guy. They beat a Florida State program that's a mess. Virginia Tech's down. Miami's down. I think Clemson players, Oklahoma players now, I think they're harder to evaluate. It should be noted Oklahoma has something going for it. The Baltimore Ravens love Oklahoma players, so some of the Oklahoma players have been very fortunate. They've gone to one of the top 3 run, organizations in the NFL. That helps them. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.